BC's softwood lumber exports will cost 15% more in 1987. Our premier thinks the deal struck with the Americans is a good one.
All in all, it's a great day for BC in that I think it's been resolved in the best way possible, and we get to keep the money in Canada, and that's the key thing to all of this.
But industry leaders disagree.
Well, it's going to cost the British Columbia lumber industry probably $400 million each and every year.
How will the tax affect our economic prospects in the new year? Tonight, David Shrek, economist and president of the Pacific Group for Policy Alternatives. Richard Allen, chief economist for the BC Central Credit Union. And Jim Matkin, president of the BC Business Council. Sitting in for Jack Webster, Iona Campagnolo.
And welcome to the Webster Show. Well, as you just heard, we're going to take a look at some predictions for 1987 tonight, and we're going to start with Jim Matkin from the Business Council of British Columbia. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Iona. Nice to be here.
Off the top, how do you look at 1987? Does it look to you like a good year, a bad year, an in-between year?
Well, I think it'll be very much like 1986. The calendar doesn't really mark the difference between economic phases. And we're in a fairly positive, upbeat phase right now. There's increased business confidence. There's an improvement in employment. Certainly, I'd say this, that 1987 will be a better year for industrial relations in British Columbia. And that's a good start.
How do you see that? Because frankly, British Columbia has not had labor peace for a long time. The environment has not been conducive to partnership between labor and management. What's changed?
Well, 1986 was a bad year, as we all remember, particularly because of the forestry and construction strikes. 1987, we can predict with some confidence, should be quite a good year, primarily because it's a very light bargaining year. We don't have any forestry.
So it's not that we're virtuous, it's just that we're not going to be talking to each other.
Well, at least that'll help make sure that 87 is quite good.
Well, what would it take to make the environment, the atmosphere for a better relationship, a partnership relationship between business and labor? Because everyone looking to the future says that has to come about for appropriate competition to take place.
Well, let me start by saying what I don't think will make a difference. I don't think there's any new law that the government can introduce that will take BC into an era of labor peace. I think basically it's a matter of the attitude of the major players.
But traditionally it's been the laws that have brought about labor war, not the other way around.
Well, I would agree with you that the law can make matters worse, but it's unlikely to make matters that much better. I think we can improve on the edges, and certainly everyone has some ideas for the new Minister of Labor. But the notion that there is one patent medicine that if we could just introduce it to British Columbia and it would just solve all of our labor problems, that is a very fallacious idea.
But surely it gets down, after all, to the old-fashioned people skills.
Yes, it does. And I think that's where we can look forward with some optimism.
We have some new faces on both sides.
We do, and we've had some success. While you remember vividly last year, if you look back the year before, it's the lowest year in our history. It's only 100,000 man-days lost, compared with a couple of million last year. So I think we have proven that we can do better, that we do have the skills to negotiate in a fashion that doesn't cause so much conflict.
Of course, one of the problems is unemployment, and let's take a look at the various sectors in the BC economy and see how the employment picture unfolds. First, of course, is the forestry sector.
Well, I'm afraid we're not going to see much increase in employment.
Are we going to see a maximum decrease because of the U.S. action?
Hard to say, but unlikely. I think the impact may take a little time to sift through. It'll certainly hurt. It will not help. The U.S. Or the new tariff or new tax will not help our forest industry.
Well, supposing the $425 million sifts down to the provincial level and into the coffers of our government, the Premier Van der Zalm has the option of putting it back into the forestry sector from whence it came to build up the forest. That could, in fact, create a number of jobs in silviculture and forest reforestation. Then, of course, the other possibility is that the money will just go into the provincial revenue, disappear.
Well, I doubt that. I would be very disappointed if the Premier did that. He's not indicated that he would do other than spend this money in the forest sector.
But the federal minister said he hoped that some of the money might go back into forestry. Now, that sounds like a pretty forlorn hope.
Yes, well, I think that's a pretty serious issue. I believe that if we are going to improve the employment prospects in forestry, that we do need to invest that money back in the industry.
And that would create jobs.
That would help to create jobs.
What impact will the rise in the minimum wage have in this province?
I think it'll have a minimum impact. The fact is, with the differentiation between the youth and the adult, there's still a fairly low threshold for the young people who might be encouraged to start their first job. So I don't see it as really a big problem. I don't think it'll hurt.
So we're just creeping up to where the rest of the country is.
Keeping it up to date so that we don't have a big gap and have to make a major adjustment, and that could cause some difficulty.
Well, looking at the other sectors beside forestry, of course, we have gas and certainly the coal. There's a glut on the coal market. Do you see much there for us next year?
No, we don't see much improvement in mining. We see that as staying relatively where it is. Certainly the same is true of agriculture, fishing, tourism. We probably will do as well as we did this year.
That's the service sector, moving out of the industrial sector where the future is really in the service sector.
Well, I would say that certainly that's a future, but don't sell the basic resources short. British Columbia is going to endure as an important economy long into the next century in forestry and mining.
You don't believe that the resource industries are sunset industries like some policy institutes in British Columbia apparently believe?
Not at all. I mean, there's just no evidence of that. Indeed, the evidence is the contrary. Do you know that we've actually increased our production in the past 3 years? Our forest production has been increasing each year. And that means that our products are valuable. And even the total value of mining. You know, people say tourism is second industry. Not so. If you look at the GNP, percentage of GNP, the total value of mines is well in excess of tourism.
But couldn't we improve again our productivity, if you will, by value adding to the forestry sector, making a much higher degree of product which we could then sell in the world?
Absolutely. And by spreading out like the Scandinavians have done, and not just selling forest products, but selling the products that make the forest products.
Well, I saw a remarkable project over in the Cowichan Valley recently where they're growing trees like carrots and silvicultures and careful nurturing of the forests. I don't know why we do not spend more time and money on that, because obviously the high value of each tree has not been traditionally in this province valued as it should have been.
I agree. I think one of the reasons is the length of time. 40 years is a long time to make an investment. Most of us, even in the political world, look at it.
4 years is politicians.
4 years is a long time.
Judges have 12 or 20.
Yes.
But foresters have to have 60, 70 years.
Yes. So that's one of the disincentives. But now we realize that we will have a forest industry 60 years from now. And by investing today, we can harvest some of that prime crop that was grown 60, 70 years ago.
Well, getting back to the free trade so-called discussions, I think they should be called protectionist discussions myself, but at the moment we see the United States, to all intents and purposes, in initiating a trade war with the European Economic Community. Will that come back and hit businesses in this province?
It will. I'm afraid the whole trade issue is one of the toughest and most dangerous for 1987. We've seen the beginning of it on New Year's Eve, literally. We've had our attention once more brought to the fact that we've got some significant difficulties in trade. I believe it was a good thing to try to negotiate our way out of these difficulties. I think a trade war could be disastrous for the world, certainly for Canada and the United States. I think that the settlements may not be as attractive as what we would like, but the attempt to find a way around these problems rather than impose 200% duties and so on, that is a formula for disaster for Canada.
Wouldn't we have been better off in the GATT?
Well, the GATT has real weaknesses. We have had, for example, a recent case where we've been trying to take it through the GATT 14 years we have been held up without a decision by GATT. That's the dilemma. Sure, the GATT rules are really better for us. Multilateral rules are better than being caught in a bilateral uneven relationship. But GATT has proven itself time and again to be both too vague, and I think that was deliberate, and too slow.
That's what happens when you look for compromise. Well, thank you very much, Jim Matkin, and we're going to invite Richard Allen on now after the break. Back again with Richard Allen from the BC Credit Union. Well, welcome. And of course, you heard what Mr. Matkin had to say, but I still think we have to go over the same ground with each one of you. How do you feel about the settlement with the United States on the softwood lumber issue?
Well, 15% is better than 27 that we began with, but even the 15% is going to have a major impact on our industry. It could have a major impact on the forest industry. And the fact that we're going to receive the 15% in terms of export taxes rather than in paying a duty to the U.S. is tremendous. It's very commendable. It's better that we pay it to ourselves than we pay it to someone else. But from the forest industry's point of view, it hasn't solved the problem. And we've estimated in our latest newsletter that it could cost the industry in BC anywhere from $200 to $600 million.
So it's not surprising that the federal government is happy, the provincial government is happy, even the IWA is not unhappy, but the industry is very unhappy.
Well, of course they're unhappy because you know where it's going to hit. It's going to hit profits, first of all.
Isn't it going to hit consumers, though?
Well, it will hit consumers, I suppose, indirectly, but you know the biggest losers are going to be the forest industry people themselves. And as profits start going down, it's going to begin to permeate the economy even more, because if the forest industries are not making profits, they're not building up retained earnings, they're not going to have capital in the future to reinvest in the industry, and some of them, of course, are going to go to business. It's
a very strange agreement in that it has a 30-day bailout clause in it. What do you make of that?
Well, I'm very suspicious. I don't, you know, the ruling has just come out, and frankly, I don't have all the details to really talk intelligently about it, except that I'm very, very suspicious when I hear that kind of a cop-out clause. It makes me think that perhaps we've gone through the first round of negotiations and the second and third are still to come. I don't know.
Well, there's also the possibility that Mr. Reagan is now a very lame duck president, and that his government may not manage to stay in power beyond 1988. We could be in a very transitional time, don't you think?
Very much. That's exactly what I mean. This could be simply the first, the opening round, and the next round could be coming up over the next year or 2 years.
Okay.
In the meantime, we're going to suffer a bit.
Let's get your predictions for 1987. How does it shape up in your mind?
Well, we're looking at a year, a pause, a retrenchment, whatever you want to call it in British Columbia. Essentially, it means not a very strong growth year in terms of total output of goods and services.
What about price of money? Dollar going to change?
Not a great deal. No, the dollar will remain fairly stable through 1987. Interest rates should also remain fairly stable. We were initially predicting a potentially strong rise in the first quarter, but I think the potential for that has also declined considerably.
But I understand you have an excellent record here on the Webster Show for predicting next year's interest rate. Would you like to cast about and give us an interest rate for 1987?
Yes, we're looking in 1987 for a prime rate in the area of about 9.25 to 9.75. During the first quarter, it'll probably remain in the 9.75 area where it is now, perhaps going up by half a percentage point or something of that nature.
And what's the ordinary person going to get on their savings account? I saw one the other day, 4.75%. It's not very much.
It's not going to change a great deal. There has to be a spread between what the ordinary person gets on their account and what they pay on their mortgage, because the banks and the credit unions have to make a little money, of course.
Yes. And how about mortgages? Going to be 10-year mortgages, 5-year mortgages?
We already have 10-year mortgages. There's one of our competitors, I won't mention their name, already has a 10-year mortgage.
Yes.
And there are going to be more long-term mortgages. As the interest rates stabilize, as interest rates move down, it's just natural that there will be more long-term mortgages. There are a lot of 5s now. 2 or 3 years ago, you try to get a 5-year mortgage and you couldn't get near it.
How about real estate? Good year to buy a house in 87?
It's a good year if you're employed in a reasonably good job. Mortgage rates won't be going up, they'll probably be going down a little bit. House prices are going to go up perhaps by 3 to 5%. But overall, it's a good year.
And what about all the various sectors of the economy? How do you see them? Gas, coal, minerals, all the way through pulp, paper, potash, and the rest?
Well, again, in the forest industry, as Jim Matkin said before I come on, the forest industries have had some tremendously good years. You know, for the last 3 years, the lumber industry has been producing record levels of output. And in 1987, had it not been for the countervail, or at least for the export tax now, there would no doubt have been another record year. But it still isn't going to be a bad year, I don't believe, in terms of total output in the forest industry. And of course, pulp and paper is coming up, and it will do quite well in 87. So that's going to compensate somewhat for
Do you think that the relative trauma we've been through in the woods industry, shake, shingle, and the rest, is now going to be ameliorated by this agreement with the United States, or was that just buying trade peace in our time?
Oh, I think it's buying trade peace in our time, as I mentioned before. I really don't think this is the end of the negotiations. When you have an escape clause, somebody eventually is going to make use of the escape clause.
And is the protection fever going to continue from the U.S.?
Oh, again, very much so.
They're great free traders till they get burnt, aren't they?
Well, yes, that's true. As long as they have an advantage in production or trade or efficiency or whatever, they're very, very happy to have free trade. But again, they're very astute traders. They're good managers. They're good traders. When they see that they're at a disadvantage for whatever reason, and in this case, the disadvantage with the lumber industry, frankly, is not the stumpage. The disadvantage is the fact that we have a 72-cent dollar. That's the disadvantage they're
That's
laboring
why
under.
our share of their market has increased so
Sure,
rapidly. We have,
exactly.
what, 32, 33% of their market now.
Yes, we do.
Of course, there's the other side of this, the U.S. right to monitor to actually inspect the operations on this side of the border with a view to helping set the price of Canadian industrial output in timber. To me, that makes us a subservient state. Am I wrong?
It's a dangerous precedent. I think that's one of the bad features of any kind of a deal that we cut with the U.S., where they have any right whatsoever to either monitor or to interfere in how we set our resource pricing policy. There's an infringement on our sovereign right, as far as I'm concerned, and I don't think we should go along
So
with that
a foreign government can tell this country how it's going to go about setting the price for its product.
Well, even more than that, you know, it's very interesting if you pursue this all the way. When we talk about a foreign government, are you really talking about a foreign government in the lumber industry now, or are you talking about the Coalition for Fair Lumber Imports?
Well, that coalition won their victory, didn't they?
But they're the ones who essentially are dictating Canadian policy now, not even the American government. It's the coalition, an industry lobbying group, and I think that's a dangerous precedent. There are a lot of precedents here that
And then
I
we
feel
end up
very
with Who
uncomfortable
Speaks for
with.
Canada. I was looking at Mr. Zimmerman's comment saying that it had made his industry into a paraplegic. An industrial paraplegic, he said.
That's an interesting way of putting it.
Yes, well, it was, I imagine, he felt as angry as his words seem to imply. But then, of course, we have the fact that lumber products per se have always been the mainstay of this province. We have many mills that are well advanced in technology. We have some that are not here on the Lower Mainland and some on Vancouver Island. With any job losses, they're going to happen in the mills that are not technologically advanced, I presume.
Well, I think so. I think we're going to see some job loss. And again, nobody knows it yet. Nobody knows whether the cost is going to be $200 or $600 million. Nobody knows how many jobs are going to be lost. But I think it'd be naive to suggest that it's not going to cost us money, first of all, and secondly, that it isn't going to cost us some jobs. I think the interesting thing, though, that perhaps hasn't been touched upon is the fact that it may also not meet the aims or the ends that the U.S. producers were hoping for.
Ah, in what way?
Well, one of the things that's going to happen, if the price of lumber doesn't rise very much, if the U.S. producers simply fill the gap that's going to be vacated by Canadian producers who don't supply as much lumber, then it means that there's going to be the large producers, those producers who are already efficient, are for the most part going to be filling that gap, because those producers who are inefficient and unable to compete at present prices are simply still not going to be able to compete. So what we will see, in fact, may be a shift away from the small producers in the U.S. to the big producers in the U.S., And the small producers who are hoping to gain from this 15% duty simply will not realize the gains. They may in the short run, but I suspect you give them a year or 2 years and have a look at it.
Provided our dollar stays roughly where it is.
Providing our dollar stays where it is.
Well, thank you very much, Richard Allen. We'll be back with David Shrek after the break. Back again with David Shrek from CUNC, and of course is one of the directors of the Pacific Group for Policy Alternatives. And global policy alternatives really are what we're into. But before we get to that, David, could I ask you to give us your predictions for 87 for British Columbia?
Well, I think for Canada as a whole, we are walking on eggs. We're going to not be seeing any disasters during the year economically. Neither are we going to see any great takeoffs. I think the consensus of opinion is we will see reduced growth, probably growth in the 2 to 2.5% range. And the problem with 2 to 2.5% growth is that that can be taken care of completely through increased productivity. In other words, no new job creation. Now within Canada, there will be increased and enormous regional disparities. Unfortunately, British Columbia is not on the winning side. We will have slightly lower growth than the rest of the country.
All of Western Canada?
All of Western Canada, and of course the Maritimes.
And the
Ontario and to some extent Quebec will be slightly above the average. Ontario will lead in terms of economic growth.
Mm-hmm. So they'll be up around 5% growth, or maybe even more.
Well, I wouldn't say 5%, but they may push 4. It'll be 3 point something.
So that means that some other provinces might be in a minus position.
The forecast that I've seen, and in my own opinion is the same, doesn't indicate negative growth for any province, but the positive growth will be so low that it will not have an impact on job creation.
Well, the impact on job creation we're talking about primarily in the forest industry, but I wanted to take a bit of a different tack with you, David, to think about the national implications of this. Will the federal government push the money through to the provinces? If so, how? Will it be discussed at federal provincial meetings? Have we created another petard on which the federal provincial level is going to be hoisted?
Well, we've opened, and it's amazing to me that no one's talked about it yet, the traditional Canadian question, federal-provincial relations.
Is it a federal or provincial responsibility?
Well, we talk about introducing an export tax. Now, that's federal jurisdiction, and then replacing it with increased stumpage fees. But we have to move from this federal tax to increased provincial fees or taxes, and presumably there has to be a transfer of the money from the federal government on the export tax to the province. No one has clearly stated what the mechanism is for that transfer, or whether British Columbia will receive $1 for every dollar in export tax that's collected from BC forest companies.
Or whether or not there'll be some American inspector passing on whether or not they should be passed through or not.
The whole question of U.S. dictating Canadian policy is bad enough. Within Canada, we've got the problem that if British Columbia collects the full amount of that export tax and then eventually the stumpage fees, the consequence on the BC budget for this coming year will be to cut the deficit in half. Now that begs the question as to whether that money will be spent.
Instead of $1 billion, it'll be about $500 million.
Well, the provincial government could take that money and simply say that our deficit problem is partly solved, thank you very much, Ottawa. Or the provincial government could say, you reneged on us, Ottawa, you're not giving us the money we have.
But your point is, David, they may not give it all to the province.
Precisely. And from Alberta's point of view, Alberta has to be worried, because for a long time, Ottawa had its eye on those petroleum resources and the revenues that were being generated. Well, now times are tough in Alberta, but if oil prices go up again and Alberta once again hits the black gold, Ottawa can say, we have a precedent here. We are going to put an export tax on petroleum resources.
And we're going to let Saudi Arabia come in and monitor.
That's right, and we will, and Ottawa will pocket the money. So there is a potential major shift here of power from the provincial government to the federal government. We have the possibility of increased centralization within Ottawa. Now, in terms of the role of Ottawa dealing in foreign trade, that is appropriate. But the tricky question in Canada always is one of how do you share those resources? And that's not been made clear.
But also, we've had a great deal of rhetoric about how we have to do something about the lack of free trade between provincial boundaries. Nothing has been done that I can see. There's been no discussion. And this is going to just exacerbate the problem.
Precisely, precisely. And it's going to be very interesting to see Mr. Van der Zam's first budget. That he's going to have to reveal what this mechanism is between Ottawa and British Columbia. Either we are going to see significant increased provincial spending on a variety of programs we need, such as reforestation. The majority of that money should go back into the forest.
Surely forest money should go into the forest.
Or we may simply see a cutting of the deficit in half. Or if we see no change at all, neither a 50% reduction in the deficit nor a significant commitment to the forest industry, then we're going to have to ask ourselves, who's pocketed that money?
Then we'd see W.A.C. Bennett reborn and the money would be put into the kit for the next election.
Well, you know, one of the things I worry about is we are hoping that the construction of the Polar 8 will be announced for British Columbia sometime this next week. I wouldn't like to see a situation where Ottawa turns around and says, see, there's your resource money. We collected it from the Americans, now we're spending it on the Polar 8 in British Columbia. We are even.
Well, if you think Manitoba blew up after the F-18, I'm sure British Columbia would blow up twice as much after that. But of course, I think that the Polar 8, at the $400 million to there, it's our turn. After all, we're likely to get it. But it's the $5 billion for the frigates that everybody should be fighting for.
There's no question we are not getting our share of federal expenditures.
Well, we did at one time, but I won't go into that. Let's talk about the possibilities of this money being used for highways. Let's talk about the possibility of it being used for education as alternatives to forestry.
Well, one of the things we went through, and people, I haven't heard a lot of talk about it in reviewing 1986, was the provincial election, and some commitments were made during that provincial election. We should anticipate in Vancouver the Cassiar Connector finally being built. We should anticipate the Island Highway on Vancouver Island, a major provincial expenditure there. We should look forward to more spending on both health and education and welfare. Now, the bucks have to come from somewhere for that. So we could well see a situation where every dime of this money, this $200 to $600 million that Richard spoke about, is already spent, and the forest industry will continue to be viewed by the provincial government as a sunset industry. I mean, you've seen from the news commentaries on opinions on whether this is a good or a bad deal, a major difference of opinion between the leaders of the forest industry and our premier. Our premier is running around saying, well, this is a fantastic deal. We should all be lucky the United States didn't dig their boots further into us.
Well, it's better than 27 or 30%.
And the forest, of course, it's nice when they stop kicking you in the head. It feels so good. And that's what the premier is saying. But the forest industry is saying we have a terrible situation here. Now, it is not good for British Columbia for a major difference of opinion to exist between the leaders of our most important industry and our premier. That little issue has to be resolved.
Well, they're in a position to do it, but we're also in a period of transition and change. As we know, in the United States, they begin their election 2 years early, so we can expect the opening shots to be fired very soon in there.
And we have a lot to worry about, because despite one's opinions of Mr. Reagan is the chief advocate for improved trade relations with Canada.
He's a known quantity.
He is going to be a powerless, if not worse, president as over this next year the arms deal further explodes in his face, and as Congress, which is extremely protectionist, seizes even more power. What we may see is the terms of the softwood deal. They may represent the type of situation we will be looking at for the rest of a so-called free trade package. Free trade to Canada may mean that we've just contracted out our government. We can close those legislatures because Washington or the U.S. corporate interest will be governing us now.
Thank you very much, David Shrek. Your calls to all three economists, after the break. We're just bursting with conversation here. You know, they say if you took every economist in the world and laid them end to end, they'd still be pointing in every direction. So it's up to you now to call in and ask the questions of these three men. First call, you're on the air. Go ahead.
Good evening, Iona.
Yes.
And David. Now, with regard to the 15% that we are going to impose upon exports from Canada to U.S. in terms of softwoods, just as a matter of curiosity, where does this put the interprovincial trading agreements?
Are there any?
Yes, indeed there are. We have duties and almost interprovincial tariffs between the various provinces.
Oh, yes, we do.
Well, we don't have so much duties or quotas between the different provinces. What we have in terms of restraint of trade between the different provinces are purchasing policies. There are the licensing requirements. A good example is always how the building trades are treated between Quebec and Ontario. So provincial licensing and purchasing policies are barriers to trade within Canada. There isn't a separate, and to my knowledge never has been, a tariff or a duty between the provinces. But where the 15% will impact on the provinces is the 15% will be collected by the federal government. Mm-hmm. Now, it is supposedly collecting, well, it is collecting, will be collecting this 15% on softwood lumber exports from every province that so exports. It then has to be relied on to give that money back to the provinces. And it has not been spelled out how that will be done. That Ottawa could keep all of that money, or Ottawa could redistribute that money in a different manner from the manner in which the industries are located interprovincially. So we could end up with a situation where BC's lumber subsidizes Alberta.
We haven't really seen the fine print yet, have
we? Haven't.
Hey, one last question.
Go ahead.
One last question. If BC, in fact, gains financially through this arrangement, do we in effect then become in a credit position, and there go our submission for the equalization payments?
Well,
I think that we're getting off the track.
Well, not really, because one is contingent upon the other down the road. And
No,
this
but
is
I
what David Shrek was referring to earlier.
This is a very temporary measure, the 15% export tax. All the fight and all the discussion has been about how you shift to what is really the permanent issue, which is that the provinces are going to increase their stoppages and costs of lumber to the producers. So the issue isn't going to be so much between the federal and provincial government. It's going to be how the provinces impose the 15%.
But what we have to keep in mind, and I agree with Jim, that it is an interim measure, but the reason why Ontario opposed this approach was the constitutional resource issue of the precedent of Ottawa taxing natural resources at the point of export. And that is an extremely important principle, and even if this export tax lasts but one day, a precedent is set where Saskatchewan has to worry about its potash, Alberta has to worry about its oil.
But I think precedent has to be based on consistent facts, and if the facts are that you have something that stays in force only for a short while until a more permanent, acceptably constitutional measure, which stumpage is, comes into place, then I don't think you're really jeopardizing.
Caller, I think we're shadowboxing a bit here because we haven't seen the fine print on this negotiation yet, and until we do, I don't think we can adequately answer your question, so thank you for your call.
And all I'm really saying there is we have to ask those questions.
That's right.
That they are important issues that haven't been answered yet.
You're on the air.
Until it happens.
Iona?
Yes, go ahead.
I was wondering, the forest industry, of course, is complaining about this new 15% tariff, and I heard on the noon report that they have enjoyed at least about 6 to 7% relief over the last few years. I'm wondering why they're crying the blues so much. We've got a healthy rate of exchange that should pick up some of the slack, and they don't seem to be paying their fair share in the last few years anyway. Why are they so worried about this market? I still think they should be competitive and should be able to maintain their market share.
There's one for you, Jim Matkin.
Well, the basic problem the forest industry has is that they don't really think the tax is meeting the need or the problem that the U.S. have identified. I think the argument that there's a subsidy isn't really the issue. And so what they're complaining about is that we're putting a burden on our industry that is really not based on substance.
Well, I can understand that to a degree, but if you ever fly over this province and see what has been done to the forest and the lack of investment in the future, I don't think they got an awful lot to cry about.
Well, part of the mythology of our province, after all, caller, is that we have been too low on stumpage for many, many years. Some people would say 25 years, some people might even say more than that. So have they had a free ride, and if so, how much?
Well, it certainly looks like it. It's about time we got some bucks back into those
Richard
mountains and you know, repair the scars.
I don't think that's really true. You know, the ultimate measuring stick is how much profit are the forest industries taking away from the province. And in fact, if you look at the return on investment in the forest industry over the last 10, 15 years, it's not high. And in fact, anybody who takes their money and buys shares in a purely forest company is not really using his money smartly. There are many other places he could put his money because the return has simply not been that good. That doesn't mean that the stumpage has been too low, but it does mean perhaps that other elements in the production process have taken too much money.
Thank you for your call, sir. We're moving along. You're on the air.
Yes.
Go ahead.
We've been hearing all the negative aspects of this province. For the new year, 1987, whenever it is, please give us some positive expectations.
Well, I'm going to have a free-for-all after that and ask you to call in with your wishes for the world. So you maybe think about that and try to come back. Thank you.
8 hot shots to tell me what are positive things for the new year.
Thanks a lot. And you're on the air. Go ahead.
Yes, down in the States, they bid up for all these tree farm licenses, which means a lot of little loggers and whatnot would, for example, here, they would bid up Lyle Island logging to quite a high price. Would that kind of system work here, or do you feel that is the main reason why we have this imbalance in
Washington State?
Yeah, I think if we get back to the basic difference between the two countries, it is that most of our forest industry is publicly owned, and therefore we have to dispose of it through a tax or a stumpage or some royalty system. Most of the U.S. industry is privately owned, therefore they dispose of the resource through a market or bid system. When they bid, they are looking into the future like we're doing tonight, trying to decide what's going to happen in 1987. And if they make a mistake, it costs them, and that's why the system is more expensive.
Do you mean the trees are owned by private people rather than
owned by the province of BC, here?
Yeah, in the U.S., so there's an awful lot of the trees are also owned, Jim, by the state and by the federal governments. And in fact, most of the controversy comes out of the bidding for those state or federally owned trees. And the problem is in the U.S. that they have a totally different system of bidding for their timber than we have here. Our stumpage costs are related to a formula, and the formula is determined essentially, or at least the price of stumpage is determined essentially by the market price of lumber. Whereas in the U.S., there is no relation whatsoever to the market price other than through the normal market demand system.
I'm going
so
to try
really
and
a speculative
squeeze
type
in
of thing.
one more call here if I can. Long distance from Port Alice.
Hello.
Yes, you're on the air.
Yes, I work in the north end of Vancouver Island. I would just like to know what this all this stuff is going on.
Is your mill technologically up to date?
It is, but we're out there and we're.
Did we lose you?
Okay.
Well, sort of.
Go ahead. You think that what we have managed to see is the impact on those mills that are not technologically up to date will be greater than those that are. But so far, we don't have much of a differentiation. IWA is not particularly worried from what I've been seeing.
Yeah, there's always going to be a layoff and stuff like that.
Well, in simple terms, if what the U.S. manufacturers want are a higher price. They want to reopen mills that have closed in the United States. It is difficult to believe that more forest product is going to be sold at a higher price. So if the price is higher and U.S. mills are opening, there is bound to be some impact on Canadian mills. Now, to the extent that the price is higher, we will still export into that market, and the consumer will absorb part of the impact of this 15%. But no one knows what the impact is going to be on jobs,
We have them
precisely
here
the
to
dollars
predict the
involved.
future, but I didn't bring the crystal ball for them to look in.
Hey, we've got
I'm
the
sorry,
camera, they
I'm
can always
running
come
out of
to us.
time. I appreciate your call, but I want to thank you all, wish you all a Happy New Year. I know you think you were positive.
Oh, and to the,
Didn't you all think you were positive?
To the caller who put that question, 2% growth for the next year is a lot better than a decline. It's positive news that we're walking on eggs, that we haven't fallen through them yet.
Better industrial relations in 1987. That's what I promised.
That's good news. Well, thank each of you for being on here today, and I'll be back with your free-for-all calls with good wishes for the world after the break. Oh, isn't that cute? Cute graphic. Back again, and now we're going to have your New Year's wishes to the world. So first call, you're on the air. Go ahead.
Yes, Iona. I wish that the world would be able to get on to a more positive way of thinking. We're always on the bandwagon of the other guy that is down. We're putting him down further. I wish we could get onto a more positive way of thinking.
More optimism in 1987.
That is right.
Thank you for your call. You're on the air with your wish for the world.
Happy New Year, Iona.
Happy New Year.
I would like to make a special Happy New Year to everyone, but in particular to our Premier Bill Van der Zalm. May he continue to use the wisdom and great knowledge that he has in being fair and honest and being the best Premier this province has ever had.
And do you have a wish for the world?
For the world, well, world peace, I guess. We can always hope for that.
Thank you very much. You're on the air. Go ahead, please, with your wish for the world for 87.
Oh, Iona.
Yes.
I think I'm a little late on I wanted a question on the other one.
Oh, I'm sorry. We passed by on that.
Oh, my.
Sorry. Go ahead. You're on the air with your wish for the world for 87.
I'm here?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, Iona.
Yes.
Here I am.
Well, what do you want to wish the world?
I want to wish the world, I want the world to work it around for the people here in BC. And I think we get down to the basics. The basics is that we have 80 and 131 in Toronto and Ontario. So we never have a voice here. And the voice here in the four provinces here, we're never going to get there unless somebody changes that.
So you want more equality in political representation in 87?
That's right.
Thank you very much. Moving on, what's your wish for the world for 1987?
Peace for the whole world.
Peace for the world. How do you think we can do it?
Well, we all have to get together and do it together.
Can you think of any group or organization that you will work for to try to increase potential for peace?
No, small people have to do it. Everybody has to work towards it.
Thank you for your call.
Thank you.
You're on the air with your wish for the world.
Yes, is that me?
That's you.
Yes, I have a wish for the world. I'm tired of seeing pictures of maimed children from bombs disguised as toys. I don't want to see that anymore.
Or maimed people of anywhere.
Well, especially small children, like I've been seeing on the news the past couple times of in Afghanistan, where there's children with maimed faces, and I definitely don't want to see that anymore.
You don't want to see it even if it exists?
Well,
or do you want to end it?
I guess, well, I would wish that would not happen.
Thank you for your wish. You're on the air with your wish?
That's me, is it?
Yes, it is.
Yes. I'm a little late here, I guess, but I'm wondering where McMillan Brodell put the money when they closed down the plywood plant here in...
I I'm sorry you missed it, so
Did they
it's too
take
bad.
money and put it over in Japan?
Have you?
On our raw logs over there on our tree farm licenses?
Thank you for your
Okay.
call. Happy New Year. You're on the air. Go ahead, please. Are you still there? Oh, I can't hear you.
Hello.
There you are. Have you a wish?
Hello, Iona. Yes, I have. Yes.
Go ahead.
Hello.
If you don't turn off your television, I'll have to turn you off. Oops, sorry, moving along. You're on the air. Go ahead, please.
Yes, hello, is that me?
Yes, it is.
Yes, I would like to wish season's greetings to everybody concerned, but there's one thing that I would like to say. I just wish that the rest of the world would keep their sticky beaks out of the situation in South Africa and let them sort the matter out for themselves.
Thank you for your
Because
wish.
we have a bad enough situation right here on this North American continent.
Thank you for your wish. Moving along, you're on the air. Go ahead, please.
Hello?
Yes.
That's me. Oh, hello, Iona Campagnolo.
Yes.
Nice to hear from you. And I'd like to wish for everybody a happy,
We're talking to Victoria now, are we?
yes, a happy New Year to everybody. And there's one thing I like to make a wish. If people stop griping about everything, what they have, what they haven't got it, and stop, and do some more work and hard work and pray to God, maybe they think will get changed better. But if you're going to keep griping and not accomplish, nothing will get better. So anyway, happy New Year to everybody, and
Thank
to you too.
Then down with grouching in 1987.
Exactly. Stop griping and but do some work.
Thank you very much. You're on the air. Go ahead, please.
Yes, Iona, Happy New Year, and my wish for the world is that all governments in all countries all over the world get together and put all their unemployed people to work in instead of just sending monies to the different countries, but send the unemployed people on jobs to help service all the people requiring food and medical care and everything that they need. And hopefully everything would be better for everybody.
Well, that's a good wish, and I thank you for it, and I hope that people listening and watching will take some action this year to make those kind of wishes come true.
I certainly hope so.
We've got another call coming up. Here you are. Go ahead.
Hi, my wish for the world is that the world would have peace.
Thank you. How old are you?
11.
What are you going to do tonight, New Year's Eve, 1986?
I think I'm going to go down to Expo.
What's at Expo now?
They're having a thing at the Plaza of Nations.
Oh, a skating rink, isn't it?
Yeah.
You have a happy time and Happy New Year.
Okay.
Bye-bye. Thank you. You're on the air with your wish for the world.
My wish is that Richmond Council would get off the bottoms and enforce this non-smoking law.
Thank you. Non-smoking in Richmond. Go ahead. You're on the world wish sequence. You're there? Have we lost you?
Not me.
Go ahead, please.
Oh, thank you. I would like to wish that people on welfare would watch the news once in a while. They wouldn't think they're so tough off.
Thank you very much. That's a very practical wish for everyone. I think we should all watch the news more often and know how well off we are. You're on the air with your wish for the world for 1987. I lost you. You're on the air.
Hello?
Hello, go ahead.
Hi, I'd like to wish my parents, Ted and Linda Buller in Terrace, BC, a Happy New Year.
Thank you.
And I'd also like to see a major change in the healthcare system for 1987.
Thank you. Long distance.
Campbell
You're
River.
on the air, Campbell River.
Iona, I'm your Liberal Trade Unionist friend, and I thank you very much. I received a Christmas card from the Right Honorable John Turner.
Oh, no politics. Got to move on. I'm sorry. You're on the air. Go ahead, please.
Oh, Iona.
Yes, last wish of the day for the
Happy New Year
world.
to you, and you've done a wonderful job. And I wish, of course, for peace.
Thank you very much indeed.
And something else I'd like to ask Mr. Vanderzam what he would do with $36 a year that he's giving the old age pensioners this year.
Now, I just got off a Liberal, so I've got to cut you off too. Thank you very
All
much
right.
for your call. And I'll be back after the break. I just want to know, Ann, these are yours. Thank you. Okay, we're ready. How much have I got for
10 seconds
10
total?
seconds? Not much. I'm not going to talk about Friday. I'll just be back on Friday.
Just wish everybody a real happy New
Yeah.
Year. That's all. That's all I have to say. I was gonna go. I was gonna do this, but I left the wife. Pat, quick, take a look at this so don't get next week. Give her delay Q. Give her delay Q because I'm starting off on that.
We'll just take a little quick
Okay.
shot of this and then
Sure.
tilt up to see you.
Okay.
Oh, you'll end up getting 15 seconds, so
Oh.
you do have a little bit of time if you want to
Okay.
say something. Delay the copyright a little. 10 seconds.
From Jack Webster and from all of us here on the Webster Show, a very, very happy 1987 to you all. And join us again on Friday. We'll be here at 5 p.m. precisely.